Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, All in One Hero, by Kemonokko. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin chapter 1, Calm Down. It will only hurt Mire. Ooze. Slime. Izuku did not want to use his quirk. He never wanted to use his quirk. He tried to squash it down inside of him, but as he had so many times before, his quirk activated without his consent no matter how loudly he screamed in his head to stop. He would have had an easier time trying to pin down the wind. The monstrous body of sludge rasped around him. Izuku could feel its mass trying to surround him, one disgusting tentacle pushing against his mouth as it tried to smother him. It had burst from the sewer grate and had leapt for Izuku immediately. The high schooler had tried to make a run for it, but it had caught him immediately. At that moment though, he wasn't scared what this sludge villain would do to him. No, Izuku worried what his own quirk would do to himself. All it took was a single touch. MMPH, he yelled into the sludge tentacle as his own body began to gooify. He felt as his skin, his muscles, his nerves, his bones, his everything, mutated. To an outside observer it would have looked like his body just disappeared, an amorphous blob of sludge replacing him, which looked not unlike the villain that had assaulted him, if with a lighter green hue to his slime, smaller teeth, and green eyes. His school clothes from a letter, a high backpack, a pair of black gloves, and the notebook he had been clutching swirled within his new body, moving as if caught in molasses. If he had a stomach at the moment, Izuku would have vomited. Instead he slipped out of the villain's tentacles and more or less splattered across the bridge wall as he slowly came to grips with his lack of bones, nerves, and everything else. One of Izuku's eyes bobbed in his body, looking back fearfully at the villain whose quirk he had unwillingly copied. The villain slipped back like a slimy tide in the opposite direction down the tunnel, shock apparent on its face before a thought seemed to strike it. Then it smiled. And laughed. Ha ha ha. Oh kid, its maw grinned wider as it sloshed toward him, its own madness-filled eyes looking him over. You are going to be my hero. It laughed again, its wheezing voice echoed at Izuku from all directions as he started to finally pull himself together, literally. Get All Might's autograph for me. Will ya? Then the villain turned and surged away down the opposite end of the tunnel, disappearing before Izuku could piece together the words it had said. He did not have to wait long to find out, as he heard, despite not having ears, someone else jumped through the same manhole the villain had emerged from. I am here, villain. All Might. Izuku's idol. Whose face was plastered over practically every inch of his bedroom. The hero he had looked up to for as long as he could remember. Who was here now, fist raised and ready to deliver one of his superpowered punches. Called him a villain. His already threadbare will snapped at those words. The villain All Might called me a villain, a quirk-stealing villain. Izuku's voice bubbled out of his maw, two small rows of normal-looking teeth lining it. He didn't know where in his body he was getting the moisture for it, but tears formed around his floating eyeballs and floating up to the surface of his slimy mass and dripped down. The minor semblance of his normal body he had tried to form collapsed and he once again splattered across the floor of the tunnel. Are you Are you crying? All Might's serious face faltered, his iconic smile fading a little as he looked down at Izuku. His upheld fist dropped slightly, though he kept it at the ready. The sludge villain he had been chasing before had been filled with a manic aura and evil intent. The tension of the iconic hero chase drained like air from a balloon. The hero seemed to catch himself as he played back the sludge's words in his head. Well, yes. I called you a villain. You robbed a bank after all. This whole situation was starting to feel awkward to Toshinori. Kacchan was right, everyone was right, my quirk, I'll never be a hero. Izuku continued to bubble, his body pooled around All Might's shoes. It was then that the hero spotted something sticking out of the sludge and grabbed it swiftly. It was a notebook. He shook it a little to get some of the sludge off, but despite the burns, watermarks, and sludge stains left on the pages, the title was still clear enough to read. Hero Analysis for the Future. All Might spoke the name on the title. Is this your young man? Do you want to be a hero? He took a wild guess on part of that. I wanted to be a Harabutt but you called me a villain. That's like getting blacklisted or a burn notice. Izuku continued to cry, all because of my copy Quirk. Copy Quirk. I know I'm not as smart as David but something doesn't seem right about this. My civilian in danger save them now senses are tingling. All Might looked closer at the sludge. Now that he got a better look, this new sludge was different looking. Well, as different as a mass of sludge could be. Sure, he had reduced villains in the past to blubbering babies with just the threat of one of his punches, and he had equally been fooled by crocodile tears. He trusted his gut, not his literal gut as that one had been destroyed, but a more metaphorical gut, a little bit too much at times but right now his gut was telling him to not punch. And All Might really liked to punch. Young man. It doesn't matter what kind of quirk you have. As long as you use it with good intent in your heart. You can be a hero. Izuku stopped crying, almost, immediately his eyes swiveling in his body to focus on All Might. As if in response to that single strand of hope Izuku's body began to pick itself up from the ground, shifting and forming a much more humanoid shape similar to his normal body's outline. Tentacles became arms and legs. His eyes and maw placed themselves in the center of his mass that looked like his head, complete with his bushy hair. His clothes floated just underneath the surface of his sludge but at least they were floating where they should have been. His thoughts raced in his head at that single sentence from his idol. You can be a hero. You really think so? Of course. All Might's smile widened, his metaphorical gut had been right after all he noted as he looked down at the shape of a young man in front of him. He had been so close, too close, to actually harming an innocent. If the boy had tried to run in fear then Toshinori would have punched him in an instant, and the hero would have regretted it for the rest of his life. Thank you, All Might. Izuku bowed, he had no spine so his top half just shifted forward at a perfect 90-degree angle before he sloshed straight again, he didn't have lips but he was certainly smiling. Then his wits and common sense took turns slapping him upside the head. Oh no. You were chasing that villain. The villain with the sludge quirk, he ran off that way, both of Izuku's arms slid over across his torso so they were side by side sticking out of his chest and pointing down the opposite end of the tunnel. He ran off after used me as bait after I copied his quirk. Izuku slumped toward the ground, his form losing some of its consistency. He had helped the villain get away from All Might, the All Might. Sure, it had been a complete and utter accident but for Izuku it was just another nail in his back for why he did not like his quirk at all. His quirk had manifested shortly after his 4th birthday, after waiting with so much excitement and dreams in his little heart and soul. He had been at school playing with Kacchan and some of the other children outside when he had tripped and fallen down. One of the teachers who had a squid mutant-type quirk had rushed over to him and helped him stand back up. Unfortunately, that gave her head the appearance of a cuttlefish with 8 pairs of tentacles sprouting from the lower half of her face in addition to her 2 normal arms. As soon as she had bent down to wipe some of the dirt off his face, his quirk had activated and in moments he had sprouted a head and tentacles similar to hers. Except he had panicked not knowing what to do with so many new appendages and his tentacles had run wild, knocking down Kacchan and a couple other children. After an hour his body had returned to normal, but he somehow knew after that incident his life would never be normal again. So had begun years of torment and wishing he had manifested any other quirk. Don't worry about it. I should be apologizing to you. I chased that villain down this way. I almost smash air, well let's not talk about that. All Might laughed and stuffed down the thought of almost splattering the boy across the tunnel and then scooping him up into a bottle to take to the police. What's your name? The off-green sludge perked up as All Might addressed him again, his form gained some of its lost consistency as he bowed again, deeper in apology this time. Izuku. Izuku Midoriya. It's an honor to meet you. With his eyes to the ground, Izuku could not notice the steam beginning to seep from All Might's form, but the man himself certainly did. He needed to make an exit, and fast. Young Midoriya. Remember what I said, to be a hero you must act like a hero. All Might half rambled, half stumbled his words out as fast as his enhanced body would allow him before he bent his legs down low and then up as he jumped away. Izuku shot his eyes back upward through his gelatinous skull to watch as his idol soared through the air and away in a single bound before he could ask anything else or even get his autograph. I didn't get his autograph. He took my notebook. He was right there. Izuku and brought his hands to his face. Instead of stopping as they would if his head had been solid, they simply melded into his head. He burbled, right. Some kind of fuzz mutation. After the squid incident, his mother had taken him to a doctor to have his quirk analyzed and classified. From describing what had happened, the doctor had summarized quickly enough that he had a copy subtype quirk, but when they had tried to activate it again they had run into trouble. He had tried to copy his mother's pull quirk, but after touching her hand and trying to use her quirk, nothing had happened no matter how hard he had tried to pick up his All Might action figure. One of the nurses had a mutation-type quirk that covered his body in shaggy hair and made him look like a dog. When Izuku had touched him, his body had immediately erupted with hair and his face had become canine-like. When the doctor had tried to get him to turn the quirk off, he couldn't, no matter how hard he had strained and wiggled his body in his chair. After an hour he returned to normal, and then the doctor had him touch another nurse's hand and she had a quirk that let her extend her arms by 6 feet. As soon as Izuku had done so, his arms had shot out in front of him and nearly knocked the doctor out of his chair. However, when he had tried to turn off the arm quirk he couldn't. His arms remained longer than he was tall for another hour until it had worn off. The doctor had taken some of his BLD and let him and his mom leave, and it was a few days later he had called back with the final results of his quirk. He called it, mutate. Right, gotta get out of here before another villain shows up. Izuku muttered to himself, his arms reformed at his sides. The gloves he normally wore floated just underneath the sludge of his hands. Normally he used them to stop himself from touching anyone, but like this his mass was too far spread out, it had no shape to rest in. After getting his quirk and when PBRTY had hit, he had always been taller and physically fit despite minimally working out and how much stamina he needed to replace with food after using his quirk. He theorized it was his body's way of preparing itself for the event he suddenly sprouted new appendages that might crush his body, or in reaction to those changes. He thought more about what his quirk could do, what changes it had made on his body and how he had seen the villain use it. He did not like to use his quirk, but no matter how much precaution he took, accidents happened. It helped out when he grew too many arms or suddenly had metal skin. I don't need legs. I can just slide across the ground. Like a slug or a ball of jelly. Izuku sighed. On the bright side, he still had plenty of time before the mutation he had copied wore off. He just needed to find somewhere he could expel his belongings floating in his body and not be naked in public when the quirk timed out. He oozed his way forward, keeping his torso still in a vaguely humanoid shape, though his lower half just became a mass of sludge. He kept to the side streets for the most part, keeping to the shadows in case someone he knew saw him and taunted him about looking like a giant booger or something, or worse. Someone else mistook him for the villain. Despite never being sludge before, he was making good time, but when he heard an explosion several blocks away he stopped. 2 more explosions followed the first, and Izuku was far too familiar with the way they sounded. He had been up close and personal to similar ones over the last 14 years. Kacchan. Izuku muttered before, instead of moving toward home he surged toward the source of the explosions. He should have been worried that someone else might mistake him as the villain that had attacked him earlier, but he quickly saw that he did not need to worry at all. The crowd gathering around the entrance to an alleyway could see that between the 2 sludge-like figures, only one was holding a young man with ashen blonde hair and an explosion quirk hostage. Kacchan. Izuku bubbled and swept forward. Instead of going around or through the gathering crowd he went underneath them, his belongings dropping from his body as he made his form thinner and less cohesive, flowing between the legs of the onlookers until he was able to reform himself into a human shape at the front, surprising the hero keeping the crowd back. That Izuku noticed with an edge of fanboy glee was Death Arms. Hey who? Death Arms sputtered, but Izuku was not looking at him. He was looking at the alleyway where Kacchan and a larger, sinister version of himself was writhing amidst smoke and flames. He's in trouble. Aren't you going to do something to help him? Izuku bubbled, turning to face the hero. Izuku felt the shape of his face form more distinctly close to his normal one than it had so far in his mutated body. He felt like his normal self, not a copy of the villain ahead of him. Maybe it was the pleading look on his face that stopped Death Arms and made the hero frown and shake his head. We can't, kid. It's too dangerous. We've called in help to Dash, he'll die before help arrives though. You're a hero, you have to do something. Izuku pleaded, his face gaining more consistency as his emotions swelled up inside of him. As a need to act grew and grew. I tried, kid. That thing is immune to my punches. Death Arms growled, anger starting to form on his face at being talked down by this random kid, and frustration at not being able to do a thing. I can't help him. You can be a hero. All Might's words echoed in Izuku's mind again. He looked away from Death Arms to his struggling childhood friend, and that need to act pushed up stronger than before until it felt like he would burst. So, he bursted. His body surged forward like a miniature tidal wave, around the hero and straight toward the alleyway. Thanks to his mutated body he barely felt the fire around him and didn't really need to breathe, so he did not choke on any of the smoke. He was moving faster than he normally could at all with his normal legs. His normal body couldn't twist into a shape almost like a drill and slam into the villain with enough force to stun it. His normal hands would have just slid through the villain's sludge. Instead his tentacles slipped through the minute space around where Bakugo's body was held by the villain, and once fully wrapped around his childhood friend slid and pulled him out of the villain's grasp. They both only managed to crash down to the ground a few feet away, but without his quirk Izuku would have never even managed that. Gra, the villain roared, its body twisting angrily in the air as it glared down at them, recognition only making his face seem angrier. My distraction. I'll kill you. I let you live so you could distract Dash, Detroit Smash. All Might, in all of his heroic glory, seemed to fill the alleyway as he brought his fist down onto the villain. The torrent of wind caused by the punch nearly swept Izuku away, but he was able to latch onto Kacchan's body and keep himself barely anchored. For him it was worth it though to see his idol scatter the villain and save the day with a punch and a smile. Everything after that seemed to move around him as a blur. The heroes who had been standing by rushed in. Bakugo was alive but weak, so he was taken to the hospital. The media was all over All Might interviewing him on how he had saved the day. Izuku wilted under the reproachful words of Death Arms and Kamui Woods for rushing in and putting everyone in danger. Izuku had only managed to get out of that when he felt the copied sludge quirk begin to wear off, and had explained to both heroes he needed to change before he was naked in the middle of the crime scene. He had expected he would have felt sticky after being living sludge for an hour, but surprisingly he felt clean, like he had taken a shower clean, once he returned to normal. Back in his normal body he had somehow crawled his way home and passed out on his bed before his mother could ask him why he was late getting home. He slept and slept some more, only a couple times waking up and fearing he was oozing down to his bedroom floor. He had to pinch himself a few times each time, but, no, he was still flesh and blood and had his All Might pajamas on. Somehow he fell asleep again and stayed that way until he heard his mother knocking on his door. Izuku, honey. Wake up. We have a guest, his mother's voice shakily sounded through his door. He wondered what kind of guest they would have on the weekend. If it had been a surprise visit by his father she would have sounded more excited, not nervous. He quickly put on a set of clean clothes and went out to greet their mysterious guest. He almost tripped over his feet when he saw All Might drinking from his mother's good teacup at their living room table. All Might. Izuku's jaw dropped. All Might was in his living room. He pinched himself sharply but quickly proved he wasn't dreaming. Ah, young Midoriya. I am here in your living room. Ahaha. All Might laughed and strode over to Izuku where his feet had rooted in place. He had accidentally copied a root quirk before, but his feet felt more stuck now than they had then. To the side his mother looked like she wanted to faint, but an iron grip on their couch kept her steady. It is good to see you looking like yourself. Izuku stuttered, but stopped when the legendary man held out something for him to take. Izuku looked at it closely. It was his notebook, the one All Might had taken earlier, and he had signed it. Gently, as if it would turn to dust in his hands, he reached out and took his notebook reverently. Thank you, sir. You have a good head on your shoulders, young Midoriya. I read as much in your book. You also have the spirit of a true hero, rushing forward into danger when no one else would. All Might paused and grinned down at him, and Izuku felt each and every word sink into him like his body was still made of sludge. The hero continued, I want to give you something. Something I know will help you become a hero. I want to give you, Izuku leaned forward, hanging on All Might's words, some advice. Advice, sir? Izuku asked. He felt like he would faint, but he had to know what All Might had to say to him. He just had to. Yes. While you have many good qualities of a hero, what you lack is confidence in your abilities. Namely, your quirk. You have a good, strong quirk, young Midoriya. Yet, I get the impression you are afraid of it. If you overcome this fear and train yourself, I believe you can become a great hero. All Might thought his quirk was a good quirk. A strong quirk. Izuku had never heard those words uttered before by himself or anyone else in his life. Or maybe he had been shutting out any praise of his quirk because of what it did to him and how others reacted to it. He had never believed in his quirk before, and he felt it would take time for him to do so. At least for now could believe in All Might, who believed in his quirk, who believed in Izuku. Ill try, All Might, sir. Izuku said and swallowed hard. That's all you can do to start. The entrance exam for you, university, is in 10 months. Go plus ultra. Next chapter, Izuku heads to Dagobah Beach, but what he finds, it's not what he expected. Chapter 2. That following Monday, Izuku had dreaded what Kacchan's response to last Friday's incident would be when he next saw him in class. As soon as the ashen blonde had kicked open the classroom door, Izuku had shrunk down in his seat, even though he was actually several inches taller than Kacchan. Just one irritated look from him was enough to make Izuku cringe down and try to be as small, as beyond notice as possible. When the other boy sat down at his desk with an irritable grumble, Izuku instinctively flinched, ready for some sort of verbal or physical assault, but it never came. He peeked over at his classmate, who was looking up at the ceiling as if it had personally insulted him. Had Izuku been blessed by the gods? Why hadn't Kacchan blown up at him for saving his life? Did he not recognize Izuku in that sludge quirk form? He had been more or less a blob of slime, but he had thought Kacchan might have seen him before when his body had solidified. Hey Bakugo. I saw what happened on the news. A lanky classmate said and ambled over, followed by a couple others. They say you held off the villain and All Might saved you. Humph, Kacchan grunted, only glancing at the others for a moment before he dismissed them in his mind. Yeah, I did. Blacked out just before All Might punched the freaking mutant. So cool. You were unconscious but still managed to get free, a girl cooed. Kacchan rolled his eyes but nodded along. To Izuku it looked like he was trying to concentrate and play back last week's events. Yeah, I did. He finally nodded, his feral grin splitting his face as what he remembered and what others had told him slotted into place to his satisfaction in his head. Just means I am already going to the best pro hero as soon as I get out of this dump. Izuku let out a sigh of relief at those words. Kacchan had no clue that he was involved in his rescue. If he had, it would have just made Izuku's life worse. Being saved by a quirk stealer. Kacchan would have made sure that he understood his place under the explosive quirk user's foot. Which meant he could plan for the university entrance exam without being bothered while their teacher droned on. Izuku jotted down a plan of action for becoming a hero in his notebook. Step 1, train. Step 2, pass the entrance exam. Step 3. Step 4, become a pro hero. He tapped his pencil against his lips as he thought, twirling it between his gloved fingers. A vague outline to be sure, but he at least had 3 goals well defined. Once he entered he would be able to analyze the additional obstacles and hurdles to graduating as a hero from the school. For now, he just needed to focus on step 1. All Might had told him to try and to work for confidence in himself and his quirk. So, what did he know about his quirk's weaknesses? He began to write more on the paper. Quirk, mutate. Weaknesses, requires skin-to-skin contact. User, me, is unable to prevent quirk from self-activating. Requires a mutation type or transformation type quirk. Emitter type quirks will not be copied. Transformation type quirks appear weaker than original copy. Once a quirk is copied will remain active for 1 hour or until user, me, is rendered unconscious. Until then user, me, is unable to turn off the copied quirk. The more quirks absorbed or full body quirks copied results in harder control and greater drain of stamina. Drain in stamina leads to inability to move and eventual unconsciousness. He had tried so many times to turn off his quirk he had by this point in his life accepted that there was no way to prevent his quirk from activating or deactivating the quirks he had copied. With how he avoided direct physical contact as much as possible most of the times he had had the chance to practice were when his mind was panicking from an accidental brush or touch. No matter how hard he had tried to concentrate his quirk slipped through his fingers every single time. He did not like the thought of increasing his hourly limit for copying another quirk, but if he was going to be a hero it would prove useful. He identified dropping unconscious, or worse, in the middle of a fight or rescue operation was the most extreme liability of his weaknesses. For now he needed to prioritize that, perhaps once he got into you, with better quirk teachers he could fix his quirk's time limit and on-off SWCH. He went back to his plan of action and wrote more under Step 1. Step 1, train increase body stamina, primary. Increase quirk time limit, secondary. Izuku was already the tallest student in his class, just shy of being 6 feet tall. Despite not exercising his body wasn't a string bean, he thought his quirk might have something to do with that, but he wasn't particularly strong either, just average. If he wanted to train he needed to focus on his endurance and preferably somewhere private where Kacchan would not find him, and if he copied a quirk he could test it privately without violating the quirk usage laws. Fortunately, he knew of a place which might just fit his needs. He had passed by it a few times but had not been there in months. Dagoba Beach. It was more or less abandoned, so it was a great hideaway, but it also was littered with scrap and junk from illegal dumping. He could take away the scrap building up his body and test out any quirks he copied on the junk heaps. It would be the perfect place to train for the entrance exam. Once school was over for the day he waited for Kacchan to leave before he changed into a modest set of workout clothes, a t-shirt that said "working" on it and a pair of shorts, and a sturdier pair of gloves for his hands. Then jogged down to Dagoba ready to be greeted by years' worth of trash and refuse. "It's clean," Izuku mumbled as he jogged up to the railing surrounding the concrete tidal barrier. His last memories of the place had been a complete and utter disaster zone, but now it looked like a pleasant place to sit and read for an afternoon. Who had done this? Had the local community finally come together to clean this place up? It must have taken 100 people or more. There was the faint trace of tire tracks in the sand. Whoever had been here had left recently, likely with a truck full of what should have been Izuku's junk. He huffed and rubbed a glove over his face. So much for that plan. Now that he thought about it, he had not actually planned what to do with the junk once he removed it from the beach. He was still too young to rent a truck after all. His eyes wandered over the beach scenery and fell on a small ray of hope. There was still a small patch of junk that had been left untouched. Just a couple of oversized tires, a few metal barrels, odds, ends, what looked like an industrial-sized fridge that had lost its shine to a plague of rust, and half of a car. He sighed. It's not what I expected, but better than nothing. Izuku hopped down a set of stairs to the sandy beach itself and jogged over toward the patch of junk, but as he got closer he heard and saw something. The industrial fridge was shifting slightly in the sand, and he heard grunts from behind it, as if someone was trying to lift something very heavy. Someone was trying to lift and move the fridge. It was definitely more than Izuku could have handled on his own. The best he might have managed was to push it over and then push it up the beach. Immediately he worried that whoever was trying to move the massive appliance would hurt themselves, and without really thinking he picked up speed and once in front of the fridge bent down and helped grasping it. Maybe 2 people could lift it instead of just 1. "Hey. Do you need help with this?" he asked. "What?" "Oh, please if it's not too much trouble." Izuku was surprised when a woman's voice returned his question, but his mind was too occupied by the task to really think too much on that. "Okay, on the count of 3. 1 2 3. Izuku clenched his teeth together as he lifted from his knees, his arms and back muscles immediately protesting, but he pushed it aside as the fridge lifted out of the sand. He shifted his hands again for a better hand hold. It weighed a lot more than he had expected. "Got it." "Yeah. I got it. Now just we'll do this one step at a time." "Back to the stairs," the woman replied through equally clenched teeth. She sounded like she might be around his age. "Okay, when I say left, step back with your left foot." "Wait, do you mean my left or your left?" "Oh, SHT. Your left." "My right." "Okay, we go this right left right." The woman spoke her cadence, each of them walking in step with one another rather than risk stumbling and dropping the fridge. He had helped his neighbors move before, so he knew not to lift with his back or move his body back too far or twist while he walked. After what seemed like an hour but was probably only a few minutes at most, they reached the stairs. "Hold on. We are at the stairs." Izuku brushed the back of his foot against the concrete stairway. How about we put it down and lay it forward? That way we can just push it up." Sounds like a plan. He could easily picture that she was smiling by the tone of her words. Slowly they set the fridge on the ground and Izuku let out a breath of sweet relief, immediately stretching his arms so they would not cramp up from exertion later. "Thanks for the help, guy. I didn't want to use my quirk to lift that thing, and because of you I didn't." He felt his cheeks redden at the praise but immediately pushed his nerves down and took a calming breath. He was happy to help. He was happy to help. He was happy to help. He shifted to the side and walked around the fridge. "Happy to help," he swallowed. He had craned his head downward to look where he had expected her head to be. Most women his age were shorter than him, except it wasn't there. What was there was powerful core muscles and a very generous cleavage barely constrained by a black sports bra which he knew courtesy of several holes in her teal tank top. Like a robot he shifted his gaze upand up, passing yet more sights to see. The rest of her low dipping cleavage, 2 arms bulging with muscle that looked like could snap him like a twig, broad shoulders which had an orange-colored ponytail draped over one side, and an extremely appealing face set with teal eyes, and a smirk. "I get that a lot, especially recently." She shook her head and chuckled to herself at what was a private joke. He continued to gape at her. She was so tall, much closer to 7 feet than he was. She looked like an Amazon. A quick glance at her feet before he looked back up at her also showed him that while she was built like a brick house, the curve of her thighs and legs could kill him. He did not like to be touched by strangers at all, but as his core wrenched, his mind flashed images of her just grabbing him and completely smothering him against her in an almighty hug. "Why, you alright, guy?" the woman asked, now looking a little embarrassed. She tried to laugh it off, but it came out more than a little forced sounding. She brought up one of her hands and pushed it toward his arm. "I didn't break you, dash. Wait." Izuku felt panic flood his veins, but his warning was too late. He felt her fist jab against his exposed arm in a playful punch. Huge. Limb. Grip. They weren't so much as words that passed through his mind as his quirk activated, but a sort of sensation of the quirk he had unwillingly copied from the person he had touched. It happened in an instant, but it kind of gave him a very slim warning of what kind of quirk he was dealing with. Immediately he felt his hands tingle and stretch. He felt pain as the gloves he wore briefly constrained his growing digits for a few moments. The sound of stretching leather filled his ears before they burst apart into shreds. His hands continued to swell larger for several seconds before they were almost comically oversized. After the initial rush of expansion was over, he noted in his mind to write down when he could about the quirk he had copied. Despite the new size of his fists, they did not feel any heavier. His wrists should have snapped like twigs, but they were easily able to handle the weight. He glanced at her hands, which had gone to her mouth in sudden shock. They were normal-sized. Sorry, please forgive me. Please. I didn't mean to. He bit down the word, steal, copy your quirk. It's an invasion of your privacy. Again, please forgive me, he sighed, frowned, and bowed frantically in front of her for good measure. Accidents with his quirk did happen, but he still felt miserable about them every time, at least when it was not a villain. You copied. He looked back up at her and noticed her face had paled. The look opened a pit in his stomach. She seemed to notice, however, and shook her head before she continued, You just copied my big fist quirk. Yes, he answered, looking over his enlarged hands. He really should clean his nails more often. My quirk, it just lets me copy mutation quirks and transformation quirks. You're sure it was ONL? I mean, you're sure you copied my big fist quirk? She asked again, taking a step closer to him, panic and seriousness expressions clashing on her face. She put her hands out to either side of herself and activated her quirk as they grew, larger than Izuku's had grown. He looked at his hands again. They were really big. What kind of answer was she fishing for from him? Yes. He paused before he continued, with transformation quirks my quirk essentially converts them to a mutation quirk type. When it does that, it takes some of the power of the quirk in the conversion process, so that's why my hands aren't as big as yours. He hoped that response would satisfy her, and she seemed to calm down as she looked lost in her thoughts for several seconds. Slowly she said, You don't have to apologize. I should not have punched you like that. She shook her head with one oversized hand. Can you, deactivate my quirk? As he always did, he flinched slightly before he responded, wary if she would suddenly become very angry with him. No, I can't. I'm stuck with your quirk for about an horn, not that I mean that in a bad way. He flushed again as he realized his words might have come off as just a tad insulting. Your quirk looks like it would be great as a quirk for a battle hero. You could throw a normal punch and embiggen your hand as you swing, surprising your opponent. Restrain villains in the palm of your hand. With the extra gripping power that you have. A smile crawled on her face as a giggle escaped her lips. Izuku immediately felt another pang of embarrassment. His quirking, muttering storms would be the death of him one of these days. Oddly, she waved her hand at him. Sorry. It's just my quirk isn't actually anything special, is it? My hands get big and I punch things. What? Your quirk is great. His embarrassment swept away by a whirlwind of shock at her sentiments towards her quirk. It really is. It might not be flashy, but it has so many applications. I wish I had your quirk over mine. Alright if you say so. It's just, her smile widened as she continued, making Izuku's pulse quicken. I don't get complimented for it very often. Thank you, though it looks like you have my quirk. She teased him with a poke across his chest with an oversized finger which made him stagger in the sand. Immediately after doing so, she shot her hand back and gasped, Oh, no. I did it again. I'm sorry, is your quirk dash? Oh, no, don't worry about it. Once I copy a quirk it's fine. It's not like my hands will get twice as big or anything like that. It's like I copy the original file for the quirk and it only will want to copy the same quirk again after it gets deleted from my body. I wish I could turn it off, but like I said, I wish I could shut off my own quirk, but I can't. It's always in. He shut his mouth. He had almost insulted her quirk again. He was only supposed to hate on his own quirk, not someone else's. Really? You can't ever turn it off? She asked, her expression softening and something like pity entering her normal teal eyes. They were normal eyes. Nothing special or inviting about them. Nope. No matter how hard I try, I hope someone at you could help. He nodded choppily, but then shook his head. That's actually why I am here. I wanted to train my body stamina and my quirk so I can pass the entrance exam. No way. Me too. That's why I cleared out this beach. Her eyes lit up and she took a step closer to him. He struggled to keep his sight focused on her face as her cleavage heaved with that step. Her words made him pause. Hold on, you cleaned all of this by yourself? Last time I was here it was an utter train wreck of a trash heap. Yeah, I know and yeah I did, she grinned proudly, bringing up one of her arms and flexing her biceps. Izuku felt his eyeballs bounce in their sockets in unison with each rise and fall of her muscles. She paused, let her arm drop and grimaced, "Oh, guess I kind of stole your opportunity to train, huh?" Removing an entire beach worth of junk and scrap that certainly would explain why her body seemed so robust. To do all that, how long had it taken her? He had heard this place was still a dump only 2 months ago. It sounded like it had just been her. He had expected being able to clear up a sizable amount of the scrap over the next 10 months, but the entire beach in a fraction of that time was amazing. "You're amazing," he muttered, too loudly it seemed, as her eyes widened and her lips pursed for a moment before she shook her head. Oh. No, I'm nothing special." She twirled her ponytail in one hand. "I wouldn't have even started if it hadn't been for me trainer. He, showed me this place and took the trash away." She continued to grasp for more to say. "Oh, wow. I lent you my quirk and I didn't even get your name." "Haha," she coughed, "it's Itsuka Kendu. By the way." She paused and looked at him. Oh, she was probably waiting for him to tell her his name. "Izuku Midori, it's a plea, it's nice to meet you, Kendu-san." Izuku replied, clenching his oversized hands together as he tried to strangle his nerves. Likewise, she coughed again and offered her hand to shake but pulled it back when he noticed him flinch again. Sorry. It's a reflex." Izuku stumbled out his excuse, but he still felt like the pit in his stomach was trying to swallow him whole. He could tell in her eyes that he had insulted her. Hurt her. Made her feel bad. It should be safe now that he had copied her quirk, but a part of him still screamed at him to avoid her touch. It's fine. I can understand," she huffed, her eyes darting anywhere but at him for several moments before resting back on him. "I know it's not much, but do you at least want to help me with the rest of this junk? Together. Like, together. Yes," he stopped himself from shouting, "I mean, even with Quirk being used. Are you sure? Like you said. You wanted to train your quirk, well here's your chance to do that." Kendu winked at him and smiled again. He did not argue any further than that. Between the two of them working together, they were able to clear out the rest of the junk that remained on the beach and bring it up the barrier wall to be taken away. There was a moment when Kendu's quirk finally had worn off and he had dropped a large scoop of scrap back on the beach. To his surprise, though, Kendu had quickly offered to top him off again with her quirk. When he had tried to protest, she had brushed his worry aside and poked him on the nose with an embiggened finger. It felt just as weird as the second time, but it wasn't a surprise and he actually did not feel guilty about copying her quirk. Just as they had carried the last barrel up the stairs, Izuku spotted a large truck backing up to the pile they had assembled off the beach. The driver cab door opened and Izuku had to double-take as he thought a walking skeleton had hopped out. It was actually just an extremely emancipated man with long blonde hair and shrunken eyes. He walked up and began to greet Kendu, young Kendu. "It appears tonight we can seal dash." His words guttered and died when his eyes shifted to Izuku. A moment later an eruption of BLD came from his mouth. He was ready to call an ambulance to help the man, but then Kendu chuckled and waved it off. "Don't worry. He does this all the time. He's fine, sort of. Al Dash is my trainer I told you about." She gestured to the skeleton man who had walked closer. He still looked like he had seen a ghost or something with how pale he was. "This is Midoriya. He had the same idea you did to clean the beach, we just beat him to it." "Why, young Midoriya?" "Ahaha." Mr. Yagi swallowed, the smile on his face looked like it would collapse in a stiff breeze. "Sorry about beating you to the punch, I mean, the cleanup." "Aha. I'm sure you wanted to train for the UA entrance exam." "Oh, how did you know I wanted to train for the exam?" Izuku asked, surprised that the man knew about that. Kendu seemed equally surprised. "Oh, well. It's every young man and young woman's goal these days, isn't it?" "Aha. To get into you. University. His smile collapsed and became more like a grimace, more blood seemed to seep between his teeth as he spoke. Yeah, you are right, thousands of applicants from across Japan applied to you, every single year, but only about 40 or so ever made it into the hero course. It was the top university in Japan, with such graduates as All Might himself. It had a gleaming reputation. Guess, I'll have to find some other way to get ready. Nonsense. Mr. Yagi waved a hand in front of him. This beach can still work out for you. Help you prepare for the exam. How? All of the junk is gone. Kendu asked, equally as perplexed by Izuku by the man's response. Ah, but I see two right in front of me. Mr. Yagi's smile returned, in earnest this time, and pointed one finger at Kendu. Young Kendu here can help you learn fighting and sparring with your quirks. Yes, she can. I can. Izuku and Kendu asked at the same time. He squirmed for a moment at the thought of feeling Kendu's skin against his again. It filled him with equal amounts of hope and fear. She can. Mr. Yagi nodded, his finger pointing out behind them toward the sea. Secondly, swimming is a great exercise. It will certainly do wonders to strengthen your body for your quirk. Part of Izuku wanted to know how the man knew he wanted to strengthen his body for his quirk, but that was pushed aside and beaten down by the next thoughts flooding his brain. He would see Kendu in a swim suit. He wasn't a pervert of any kind. Really, he wasn't. He was still a young man with hormones who was interested in the opposite section. Sounds like a plan. Chapter 3. When his back slammed into the beach, creating a small storm of upturned sand and a crater, he sank into. Izuku had to admit, for what felt like the 100th time, Kendu knew how to put the moves on him. Oof, I think I almost saw my ancestors with that one. Izuku quipped weakly, anything to distract him from Kendu's powerful arm locked across his chest and her looming figure that filled his vision. When she smiled, it reminded him of All Might. Ah, but you look so cute on your back. Like a cute little hedgehog. Kendu winked before she jumped back up to her feet and helped up with a strong enough tug on his hand, one embiggened hand locked in the other. For a moment he thought she would dislocate his shoulder. He was happy though that he was getting much more used to touching Kendu. It came with the necessity of sparring, but he no longer flinched as much around her. At least you're learning to fall better, Midoriya. It's something, I guess. He shook his head and rolled his arm to ease up the tension. Sparring with Kendu was something else. The ginger-haired Amazon was fast, strong, and well-trained in several different martial arts. Her last attack that had sent him sprawling had been simple. She just charged straight at him, swept his feet from underneath him, and knocked him down with her arm across his shoulders. In short, she was still amazing. Hey, you have been getting better over the last month. Kendu frowned at him, which only made him curse himself silently. He hadn't meant to make it sound like he was whining or complaining. I know, he sighed and rubbed the back of his head. I'm just having a hard time trying to find my advantage in a fight against you. He had studied heroes fighting villains for years. He could easily call up the strengths and weaknesses of most pro heroes in a snap and decide the best way to fight them, but in practice was a lot harder than theory in his case. You do have an advantage I can't beat. Itsuka pointed at his embiggened hands, unpredictability and adaptability with your quirk. No two fights will be the same for you. I don't know. It's not like there will be quirks I can copy just laying around every fight. I've really only been able to spar you with your quirk so far. Which was true. So far he had been mostly training with her quirk, except for once or twice, and those times had been accidents and short-lived. Auntie Mitsuki had come over to the apartment he shared with his mother and she had hugged him on his way out the door, so he had her glycerin quirk. Another time the subway train had stopped short and a man had bumped into him with a mutation quirk that grew a strong lizard tail. Auntie Mitsuki's quirk let me produce enough liquid from my pores that made skin contact with my slippery until I hit the sand and it stuck to my skin, negating the quirk. The lizard tail was useful to sweep out your legs, but then I lost my balance and fell over. Though Big Fist was useful to get me back to my feet he felt a flick on his ear from Kendu's normal-sized hand. "You're mumbling, Izuku." She did not seem annoyed with his mumbling, she was smiling at him again, and that more than the flick to his ear made him stop. She was wearing a teal training gi that absolutely hugged her form and did more to accent it than hide it. He also knew fully well that she had brought her swimsuit with her. It was part of the training schedule they had come up with. On the weekends they would spar in the morning and then do laps in the ocean in the afternoon. He could just picture her in it. No, that was a bad idea. He could not afford to be so distracted when he was so far behind her in training. He also doubted she saw him like that. He did not know her type, but that didn't stop him from thinking that she had far better choices than someone like him. "Sorry," he mumbled, caught himself, then spoke louder. "Sorry. I just wish there was a better way than using or just to use my quirk." Improvement on the time limit on his quirk had been non-existent as far as he could tell. "Don't sweat it. Once you get into you'll have loads more resources to improve," Kendu replied, which was another frustratingly attractive thing about her. She believed he would get into with her. "How about we end the sparring a little bit early? You get in the water while I run through some of my forms, okay?" "Sure." He grabbed onto the lifeline to change the topic and do something else. Together with Mr. Yagi they all had been able to set up a small changing tent on the beach and even connect a shower for after each swim. The beach had been a popular spot at one point before all of the illegal dumping, so it had only been a matter of tapping into the water line. Heading over, he changed into his swimsuit, slipped on ear plugs, and put on the goggles he wore to protect his eyes from the sea water. After a few warm-up stretches he walked down to the water itself, but he did his best to not stare as Kendu stretched her body through one or another forms of the various martial arts she studied. The cold ocean water had not failed to clear his mind before. It would help again. Dipping into the water, he floated on the surface for a minute or so, letting his body get used to the colder temperature of the sea water. Once he felt comfortable, he started his warm-ups. Holding his hands out, he brought his legs up together, back toward his body, and moved them out, propelling him through the water. Slowly he moved his arms out at his sides, progressing into a breaststroke. It had taken him a few days of practice, but the movements felt automatic, natural. It always made him feel like a frog. He used a buoy out further in the water as his end point for his sets. It was a few meters short of an Olympic-sized swimming pool, but it worked out. After 50 sets of the breaststroke he changed his form, adopting a freestyle strike. Instead of kicking out to his sides he kicked straight, his arms coming up and down in the water over his head. After another 50 of those he flipped on his back and began to backstroke. Kendu's quirk timed out mid-swim, which slowed down his speed, but that was fine. He hadn't exactly taken to swimming like a fish to water, but he did have to thank for encouraging him to take it up. After the first couple days of washing up on the shoreline he had begun to improve, and it was a lot more noticeable than his sparring with Kendu. His stamina was getting better, even if it was slow going, which helped buoy his confidence about his quirk. After another 50 sets of the backstroke he let his body rest in the water, floating just above the surface with his arms and legs spread out. With the sun on his face it felt peaceful, relaxing. After a few more minutes he decided to hold his breath and turn over in the water so he could look down at the clear sandy floor beneath him. With how clear the water was he could make out quite a lot beneath him. There was a couple of fish swimming in a small school, the floor was littered with shells of all shapes and sizes, there was a frog girl staring at him, and also the telltale shape of a couple rusted barrels stuck in the sand from the past illegal dumping. Wait. Frog girl. He shot his head down and focused. Yes, there was a girl who looked like she was a frog staring at him nonchalantly from the seafloor. She waved a slightly oversized hand at him. He did the most natural thing when surprised, he gasped and immediately choked on the sea water that flooded his lungs. He felt his lungs and throat burn. Immediately he started to thrash in the water to turn around and break the surface, but even though he managed it he was still choking on the water he swallowed. His vision blurred as he continued to gg and sputter, then he felt something slimy wrap around his waist and tug him back quickly toward the beach. Except the moment it touched him he felt his quirk activate. Amphibia. He didn't have time to appreciate the changes to his body, he only felt the rush of speeding through the sea water and being pushed to his hands and knees into the sand. Cough the water out. It will burn, but you need to drain it out before you can breathe. Karo, a deadpan woman's voice told him. He couldn't do anything else but shake on his limbs and heave up the sea water onto the sand. It hurt, but just as she said it was getting easier to gasp for air. His entire face must have looked green or blue. After he felt like he could breathe easier again, he turned to his savior. Thank you for that. Karo. Did he just ribbit like a frog? The stunned face on the frog girl he had seen earlier told him that he had. Strange. I didn't realize you had a frog quirk like mine when I first saw you. She put one long finger to her lips. She was actually pretty cute. Her head was slightly shaped like a frog's, but she had large eyes and long green hair almost the same shade as his own. She was also wearing a green bodysuit that showed off a lithe swimmer's body. I don't normal hrug, he began to say before his tongue erupted out from his mouth, stretching in the air for several feet before it fell limply to the ground. Bleh. On instinct he retracted his tongue and regretted it, feeling the crunch of sand between his teeth. He did his best to spit it out. Oh my gods. Izuku, are you alright? Kendu's voice called out urgently. He heard her feet charge across the sand over to them before she stopped suddenly, followed by silence. I'm fine. Bleh. I'm fine. He looked up at Kendu and immediately felt his core tighten up in response to what he saw. She was wearing her swimsuit now. It was a one-piece that didn't look all that different from the ones girls wore in school. On her thumb felt like he needed to jump back into the water. It stretched over her well-built, Amazonian body in ways that made him want to bang his head into the ground. What stopped him from doing that was the stunned look she was giving him. Her eyes were wide and her mouth was open. Kendu. Karo. Midoriyuyu. Her eyes started to waver as she leaned closer to him, until she finally announced, her eyes almost seemed to sparkle, "You're so cute." Agreed. Karo. Karo. Frog Girl simply stayed next to him, making him blush for several seconds before he stomped it back down. Oh, right. Quirk. Karo, he grumbled and looked over himself. His limbs had gotten longer and they now seemed to want to naturally bend, as if he was readying himself to spring into a jump. His hands and feet were much larger and definitely webbed, which he guessed explained how Frog Girl had moved so quickly through the water. He felt his face and his features felt like they were changed, his eyes and mouth were bigger and wider while his head felt angular, similar to a frog's. He already saw what had happened with his tongue. Thank you for saving me and I apologize for copying your quirk. Please forgive me. He apologized and bowed to Frog Girl on instinct. At least it did not feel so bad this time because she had actually saved him and copying her quirk had been unavoidable. It is fine. Karo. I should apologize for startling you. I saw how nice the beach had become and saw you, so I let my curiosity get the better of me, she replied, bounty, waving off his apology. Though I am surprised that you copied my quirk. It is a good surprise though. My name is Tsuyu Azui. My name is Izuku Midoriya and this is Itsuka Kendu. Karo. Izuku riveted. It somehow felt natural to do so after only a few minutes after copying her quirk. It's nice to meet you, and thank you for saving him. Kendu added in. Azui put her finger to her lips again. I've never heard of a quirk that could copy mutation quirks. Emitters and transformation quirks, yes. Yeah, mine can. It can also copy transformation quirks, but it kind of converts them to mutation quirks in my body, so I can't turn them off, like I can't turn off your quirk right now. Izuku sighed. If he could just turn off his quirk he wouldn't have sand stuck in his teeth. That sounds inconvenient. Karo. Azui blinked and replied bluntly again, but potentially very powerful. What? Someone else was actually calling his quirk powerful. Sure, All Might, Kendu, and Mr. Yagi seem to have some hope for it, but still, haha. See now, someone else agrees with me. Kendu grinned triumphantly. wrapping her arms underneath her chest and pushing her bust out in a way that made Izuku flinch his eyes away quickly and back to Azui, who appeared to be staring at Kendu with interest. Maybe. Her facial expressions did not seem to change that much. Was that from her quirk or just something she did on purpose? Your quirk is what's going to get you into you, eh? Oh. Are you both also applying to the hero course at university? Azui asked, her head dipping to the side in curiosity. Yes, we both are. Kendu nodded her head enthusiastically before she swept one bulging arm over the beach. I cleared up the beach, with Midoriya's help toward the end. Now we are using it as our training grounds for the exam. You are. Azui tilted her head the other way. I just thought you were a couple out for a date at the beach. Karo. This time his blush came back with much more power and was not so easy to subdue. He felt like if he looked at Kendu his chest would burst, so instead he focused on Azui. He raised both his hands and shook them, and no. Karo. We aren't a couple at all. We're just friends and sparring partners. It took him 2 weeks for him to accept that she was his friend, and even then Kendu had to drag it out of him to finally realize it. She had challenged him to a big fist-thumb wrestling contest, and when she had won he had to say it out loud that they were friends. Yeah, Kendu added, but unenthusiastically. He thought he heard her shuffle on her feet and kick the sand, but he was focused on not looking at her. After a short pause she coughed and continued, if you are applying for you, eh? Why don't you join us? Join you? Join us, he and Azui asked and riveted in unison, electing a giggle from Kendu and forcing him to finally look back at her. He thought he saw the telltale signs of a blush on her cheeks but dismissed it as unlikely. That's what I said. Kendu stifled another giggle. I can show Azui-san my fighting moves, and she can provide her quirk to you to practice with. Plus it would be nice to talk to another girl. Plus ultra, more the merrier, right? Agreed, I accept your invitation. Azui bobbed her head before Izuku could say anything. He couldn't blame Kendu for wanting to talk to someone more interesting than him. Just like Kendu had said, it would be handy for him to have access to another quirk, but it felt like he wasn't sharing equally. Azui was giving him her quirk, Kendu was giving Azui sparring training. What else could he offer that would help both Kendu and Azui pass the entrance exam? Okay, but let me help you both study for the written exam. Also, I don't know how much it will help, but I can give you advice on how to fight other quirks. Hopefully his notebooks would be good enough. Alright, I know my own strengths, but if we needed to fight others' examinees for the practical it would be useful. Azui bobbed her head again. Awesome. Welcome to the Dagoba squad, Azui-san. Dagoba squad. Izuku chuckled, shaking his head as Kendu winked at him. Thank you. Also, please call me Tsuyu. Karo. You got it, Tsuyu-chan. Kendu beamed. She looked very pleased at the latest turn of events. Oh okay, Tsuyu-san. Izuku stuttered, a little nervous to use a cute girl's given name so casually. Wait. Cute girl. I am curious, Midoriya. Azui turned to him, dashing his last thoughts out of his head as he focused on her. Can you only copy one quirk at a time? Multiple. Do you need to touch them? He was shocked by the blunt questions but was oddly pleased someone was asking him about quirks, even if it had to be his own. I can copy multiple quirks at once. It takes a lot more energy for me to do so, and I can only do it by touch, which lasts only an hour. Yeah, Izuku has been struggling to overcome his time limit and he can't turn off his quirk, so he isn't really big on touching other people. Kendu added with a huff. Did she sound disappointed? Yeet just takes a single touch from me, but I can't do it through clothing. Which is hard because I don't want to be labeled as some weirdo asking random people if I can touch them to copy their quirk. Izuku blanched at the thought. He'd probably die of a heart attack just trying to ask a stranger. Does it have to be skin? Would something like hair or teeth work? Karo. Azui asked, and he nodded back an affirmative. Granted, he had never touched someone else's teeth, a few times he had just accidentally brushed long hair while they were walking by or the wind picked up suddenly blowing it in his face. She continued, does it have to be attached to their body? Izuku opened his mouth, and then immediately closed it. Did it have to be attached to the quirk user for him to copy it? He tried to remember if he had ever copied someone's quirk out of the blue without touching someone. He usually wore his gloves and tended to wear face masks and scarves until the temperature spiked hot. He also avoided crowds like the plague. His mom cut his own hair, and the 1 or 2 times he had gone to a barbershop he had always arrived early so he could leave before they got busy and crowded. What if there was a time limit for the genetic material to be separated from the quirk user before his own quirk could not copy? You're doing it again. Kendu's words interrupted his mutter storm and dragged him back out of his head. Azui ribbited in amusement. Sorry. Kero. I guess to answer the question. I don't know. Izuku blurted out. Well, we can find out now. Can't we? Kendu said, moving one hand to her orange ponytail and after combing through her hair for a moment gave a sharp tug. She held out a single strand of her hair for Izuku to take. He almost reached out and grabbed it but hesitated. What if his quirk absorbed hers because she was still holding her hair? So instead he cupped his hands and asked her to drop her hair. Understanding, she let the single thread of hair go from her fingers and they all watched as it drifted through the air and onto his palm. Huge. Limb. Grip. His hands swelled larger as he copied her quirk. Two never knew that could happen, Kero, he said, dumbfounded as he stared at his hands. He poked one finger at the strand of Kendu's hair in his palm. I get the feeling, Midoriya, that you have been so focused on learning about other people's quirks that you have really shunned your own. Azui hummed knowingly, and he couldn't argue at all. This was one way he could get around his time limit and the need to touch someone to use their quirk, but a thought occurred to him as he imagined himself doing that. Wait, no. I don't want to be some weirdo who goes around carrying other people's hair or fingernails or something strange like that. Izuku groaned and placed his head in his oversized hands. He had made progress on his quirk but he wasn't sure he liked it all that much. Chapter 4. Itsuka took in a deep breath and then let it go. She took another, bringing her arms up to her sides. The setting sun made the water along Dagoba Beach seem like it was on fire and it was appealing. Slowly she straightened her arms so her hands were out diagonally away from her sides, then she activated her first quirk. Big fist made each of her hands swell several times their size. Breathing in again she activated her second quirk, one for all. Her arms to the tip of her fingers began to glow with power, orange sparks sputtering from her skin here and there. She felt the power build and build in her arms, making the muscles bulge and grow to almost a proportionate size of her fists. Air pressure smash. She yelled, swinging her arms upward and clapping both of her hands together. The beach erupted in a sonic boom of sound as air pressure from the power of one for all erupted outwards in front of her. The highly pressurized air cut deeply through the sand and kept going, surging out into the ocean itself and parting a path through the waves revealing the sea floor, sending shells and sand flying upward and crashing down for yards around. The power of her attack continued for several dozen yards out to sea before all of its force finally dissipated. The ocean water surged back over the channel she had created, surging up the beach into the trench that ended just in front of her. That was painful. Ow, 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 ow. Itsuka hissed, shaking her oversized hands in the air as they throbbed with pain. She dropped down to her knees and moved her hands into the water, letting the cold temperature numb some of the pain she was feeling. Well done, young Kendu. All Might smiled at his successor, walking up to her in his deflated form and reassuringly patting her shoulder. His face shifted to concerned. Does anything feel broken? No, it just feels like I smacked my hands into a concrete wall 100 times. She smiled up at the hero before she sighed. If I did that again now though I think I would. Haha. Then rest easy. You have come a long way since you received one for all. Fruits of your training. All Might let go of her and admired the beach. It is a shame we have not had all that much time to train with one for all, but you seem to be doing just fine. Right, just fine. Itsuka sighed. She could definitely say that the vast majority of the training she had completed was in the company of Midoriya and Tsuyu rather than with Japan's #1 hero. Thinking about her two training partners, she was happy to note they were both progressing well in their own training for the entrance exam. Especially Midoriya, he flinched less when they sparred and had come up with some great ideas for combining Itsuka and Tsuyu's quirks. After their fateful first meeting together on this very beach, All Might had expressed concerns about Midoriya, not so much his confidence in the young man but fear that the secret of One for All would be discovered. She had reassured him that the secret of the quirk was safe with her. She put immense value in the trust he had in her and she would not betray that even with her own family. It had also helped when she argued that as a hero in training she could not turn her back on someone else who was striving for the same goal as her. All Might had chuckled and just reminded her that he had been right to choose her as his successor. Overall, she had settled into a happy rhythm with her two friends, and would not trade it for anything. Though she did feel guilty about not being able to train with One for All as much as she wished to, again a good portion of that came from All Might's own willingness for her to figure things out on her own. His first words of advice to her, "Pull on the power and clench your butt," had resulted in her breaking her arm. Which had made her wonder. "All Might, is it alright if I ask you a question?" she said, shrinking down her fists with a wince before she stood up and wiped the sand from her knees. "Of course, young Kendu. I am here to help after all. Ask away." All Might smiled at her and sat down on the steps leading up the sea barrier. "Who exactly trained you in how to use One for All?" She looked at him waiting for him, but instead of responding he looked to have frozen still. Considering this was All Might that was concerning. Had she touched a nerve? Brought up memories of a friend or family member who had passed away. After almost a minute of waiting she walked closer to him and realized that he was sweating. My mentor." All Might's teeth chattered, his whole body soon began to shake. "BLD" dribbled from his mouth, he sounded terrified. Which only made her worry more. His name is Gran to Torino." All Might finally gasped, his eyes darting around made it look like he was afraid something would swoop down and carry him off into the night. "He is retired in Yamanashi." "He's in Yamanashi. That's not far away at all. Do you think could show me how to use One for All?" Itsuka asked. It felt like ripping off a band-aid, but she had to face the fact that maybe All Might was not the best teacher. He whimpered softly but All Might nodded his head. She hadn't exactly bullied or forced Japan's #1 hero into calling his old mentor, but she had certainly made sure that he did actually do it rather than let him conveniently forget or push it off. It was for his own good, well, her own good, but she had a good feeling that she could really make the next breakthrough with One for All with some new perspective. Due to the nature of her natural quirk she was able to channel the power of One for All much easier through her fists and at least double the power output than if she used it without embiggening. However, despite the Amazonian growth spurt she had gone through after receiving One for All, cleaning up Dagoba Beach, and training with Midoriya using its power still damaged her body and it was always hyper-focused in her fists, she did not have the speed or endurance in the rest of her body that All Might displayed so easily. Yes, she had plateaued and going to Gran Torino for advice would help, but not only her. She had managed to convince All Might to also convince Gran Torino to accept training her two friends as well during the last week of summer break. It would help them with their quirks and it would be a great cover for why she was going to Gran Torino. Using the white lie she and All Might had come up with that his deflated form was her trainer, she had told both her friends that he had recommended they go see the retired pro hero for help with her big fist, Midoriya's mutate, and Tsuyu's frog quirks. When he had finished his conversation with the older hero, All Might had simply shook his head and begged that she and her friends get their affairs in order before they left. Tsuyu had easily agreed to her plan to head to Yamanashi Prefecture for a week, but Midoriya had taken a bit more convincing after he had learned that the train they would take from Shinjuku left at rush hour. His reluctance was all the more evident when she walked up to meet him with Tsuyu outside of the station. "Hey Midoriya. Are you ready?" she asked, making sure he heard her before she got too close as to not startle him. "As ready as I'll be, I guess." he replied with the tone of someone going to their execution. Whereas Itsuka and Tsuyu had dressed in casual wear, light tops and jeans, Izuku had dressed to be as inconspicuous as possible. He wore a dark green hoodie with the hood covering his head along with a face mask that said "face" on it, leaving only his nervous green eyes visible. His gloved hands and arms were locked at his sides, holding the straps of his backpack as if it would fly away at a moment's notice. She could hear him taking long breaths of air and his body tensing up. He was the definition of being on the edge. This was really the first time she would really be hanging out with Midoriya outside of Dagobah. Sometimes they stopped and got breakfast or dinner together when one of them did not bring their own food. Those times though were always during the least crowded times of the day on the train. Which from what she had pieced together was planned by the boy who seemed to plan out when the crowds were at their least before going anywhere. However, she did not blame him or think he was a coward or being over-irrational. His fear came from just how uncontrollable his quirk was. She trusted him that the accidents he had been forced to in public when his quirk activated were serious enough to warrant his fear, and as his friend and fellow hero in training she would help him. She was also not alone in wanting to help him. Midoriya. Would it help if you held my hand? Tsuyu asked, the frog girl slowly extending a gloved hand to him. He flinched a moment at the gesture but rolled on the heels of his feet rather than run away, she guessed. After a long moment he looked at her hand and then at Tsuyu before he nodded, and instead of slowly taking her hand shot his own hand out. He grabbed her extended hand and went rigid, waiting to see if his quirk would activate, but when it did not he finally let out the breath he had been holding and relaxed, a little. Thank you, Azui, he mumbled, blushing as he looked at his hand wrapped in her own. I told you, call me Tsuyu. Karo, she bluntly replied. Sorry, thank you, Tsuyu, he stammered and sighed again, deflating even more on his legs. If he wasn't careful he would fall down and probably not get back up at this rate. Itsuka smiled at the frog girl's actions. If her friend wasn't a few steps away from having a meltdown she would have taken a picture. Instead she stepped up to Midoriya's opposite side. We'll both be with you the entire time, Midoriya, she said, looking down at him and gently taking his other hand with her own gloved one. This time he did not flinch. You will be fine. We got you covered, right, Tsuyu? Absolutely, thanks, he mumbled back, sinking more into his hoodie but standing straighter. She was only able to catch a glimpse of his face, but she could tell it was adorably beet red. Okay. Let's do this. Itsuka cheered, and began to guide Midoriya forward along with Tsuyu. He moved like he was in a fog, but they were able to pull him along to the station and inside. Once they hit the initial crowd of people inside she felt him tense up, and a glance saw his face had become a grimace. He would flinch whenever she or Tsuyu bumped into him but would relax once he realized it was one of them. Fortunately together they were able to maneuver him through the station, breaking for gaps between the press of people and waiting for when traffic jams cleared up before moving forward. Eventually she heard him start to mutter underneath his face mask. Listening closer she realized he was mumbling about quirks. Not any quirk in particular, he was just rambling about different quirks, perhaps as a technique to let his mind go to his happy place. At one point he had just kept walking after they had stopped, and Tsuyu had to use her tongue to pull him back before he wrenched himself free from them. Once they were at the right platform to wait for their train to be ready to leave for Yamanashi, they sat down at a bench, her and Tsuyu on either side of him, which helped to bring him out of his foggy daze. They were able to help him keep his mind off of the crowds by making small talk. Tsuyu talked about her siblings, about what their schedule would be like once school started again, and so forth. At one point she was distracted when she noticed on the platform an older man, an obvious salaryman by the black suit he wore, not just leering but ogling her. She had been pretty even before One for All had exploded her figure, so she was used to dealing with this sort of thing by a quick chop to the pervert's neck. The only thing that kept her from acting was how Midoriya would react if she suddenly got up and walked away, but to her surprise she did not have to. The pervert's gaze slid to the side of her and then he jerked back, fear on his face, then turned around and walked in the opposite direction down the platform. Itsuka looked over at her friends. Whatever the pervert had seen hadn't come from Tsuyu because she was looking at her phone. Midoriya however had leaned forward and his face was turned in the direction of where the pervert had looked. She couldn't see his face with his hoodie up but she imagined she could feel the glare radiating heat off of her friend. That made Itsuka smile. She had caught Midoriya staring at her body more than once, in fact he had done so the very first time they had met, but when he caught himself he always gave himself a mental and sometimes physical slap to the face. Which she always noticed and always made her smile. Her friend wasn't bad to look at either, he had started out cute, and still was, but by the way his body was developing from training a part of her was interested to see him after the next few months. "This is us," Tsuyu announced as a train pulled up to the platform and disgorged its riders. Together she and Itsuka picked up Midoriya from his seat and guided him into the train where they quickly found and claimed a set of seats away from the doors and with a window view so he could focus on something other than his surroundings. "Oh gods, finally," Midoriya cried out, collapsing into his seat and putting his gloves over his face. After a few seconds he peeked out at them, "Thanks for putting up with me, appreciate it. I'm always happy to help you, Midoriya." Tsuyu riveted and settled down into her seat, holding her knees up to her body as she got comfortable. "That goes double for me, you know that." Itsuka winked at him and punched him lightly in the arm. After that they all settled down for the train ride to Yamanashi, which fortunately went smoothly and on time, no villain attacks delaying their trip. It took them a little over an hour to arrive at the city where Gran Torino lived, and a bit more to get out of the train station which fortunately was less crowded than Shinjuku, so Midoriya was much more animated than when they had departed. It was almost noon. From the directions she had received from All Might they would be able to stop and eat for lunch before the time they were supposed to arrive at Gran Torino's place. Fortunately their route from the train station took them through a market space with restaurants and shops lining the street. They sat down at an outdoor cafe, ordered lunch and talked while they ate. "Do you know anything about this Gran Torino?" Tsuyu asked before her tongue darted out and dragged a piece of sushi back into her mouth. "Not really," Itsuka admitted, biting her lip. All Might had not said much about him other than he had been his teacher at UA, from the way Mr. Yagi talked about him he sounds like a tough instructor but effective. "I wasn't able to find much about him," Midoriya added, having pulled down his hoodie and face mask to eat and chat. "He is supposedly retired but he still patrols, but it doesn't seem like he has faced many major villains in the past. He wasn't famous and did not have a record of facing off against powerful villains, but at the same time he knew about One for All and had trained All Might." The number one hero had not told Itsuka much about how Gran Torino knew about the quirk, but he was trusted with the knowledge of its existence and could help her develop it. There was definitely something more there, but whatever it was only one of the two heroes could tell her. "Are you alright, Kendu?" Midoriya asked, a slight frown on his face as he looked closely at her. She realized that she had narrowed her eyes and had been staring off. She shook her head to clear her thoughts. "I'm fine. Just thinking about what he has in store for us," she answered. Midoriya nodded slowly and seemed to accept her answer. Tsuyu though gave her a puzzled look but did not say anything further. Once they were finished and had paid their bill they got up and left, heading back on their trek to Gran Torino's apartment. As they passed a florist shop out of the corner of her eye Itsuka caught several dozen bouquets with arms and legs, but no visible head rushed out of the shop, and right into Midoriya. Chapter 5 Thud Izuku never saw the person that he bumbled into, only catching the sight of the dozens of bouquets rushing toward him in the corner of his vision before they crashed together. He braced his legs at the last second to stop himself from being flung out into the street, but whoever had hit him had no clue he was there, so instead they stumbled forward further into him. Through the mass of arranged flowers a forehead snapped forward, connecting with his before the other person stumbled backward, dropping some of their load. Oh no, his quirk, slash. Cut. Blade. His skin began to tingle across his arms, legs, mouth and backside before he felt a sharp pinching sensation start off painfully dull before it lanced upward in intensity enough to make him gasp out. His head elongated, his mouth stretching wider to accommodate a pair of fresh, new mandibles that erupted outward from the back row of his teeth, cursing outward from either side. At first glance they did not feel like an insect's mandibles, they were stiff in his mouth and he felt like he could not move them. He felt his skin part underneath close as multiple growths surged upward. It was enough warning for him to jump back out of anyone's arm's reach. RIP tears formed in his clothes as chitinous-looking blades speared out from where he had felt the most pain on his skin before. The outer sides of his forearm sleeves burst as meter-long blades slashed outward. His pants along the front and outer sides of his shins and thighs were similarly shredded as 3 curved blades, as about half as big as the ones on his arms, tore free. Finally, the back of his hoodie blew out as 3 more meter-long blades grew downward, 1 vertically from where his spine met just below his neckline and 2 from his shoulder blades. All 3 together seemed to form a protective cage around his backside which he thought would certainly block anything that tried to slash him across the back. Taking a closer look at his arm to see where the blade emerged from his skin, he saw that shelled chitin, almost like an exoskeleton, had grown around it. He wondered if a knife could cut through it or if it would be deflected like a sword hilt. He felt a tremor of weakness course its way through his body, as his quirk used his stamina to complete the transformation of the one it copied. Izuku. Are you okay? Itsuka cried out, worry in her voice, and stepped forward, one hand raised as if to grab him. He blushed at her slip of using his personal name, but he shook his head in motion for her and Azui to stay back. He had to make sure he did not hurt either of them. W8. Please, W8, just let me make sure nothing else is going to pop out of me, he growled out the words over his new mandibles. Of course something like this would happen to him, no thanks to his DMN quirk again. His clothes were ruined and now he stuck out like a sore thumb. He felt anger steam up inside of him. Normally he would just accept it and move on, but this time he just wanted to shred something with the copied quirk. Fortunately a new voice pulled his attention away from his own thoughts. Oi! That's my quirk. Izuku looked to the shout's source. It was a praying mantis. A young man who looked about his own age with a mohawk of green hair that was much lighter than his own. The mohawk sat on an insect-looking face with a familiar set of mandibles. He was slightly taller than Izuku and had light green skin that reminded him of pea soup. The man whose quirk he had copied dropped the remaining bouquets he had been holding and shockling sent Izuku a feral grin. Finally. A worthy opponent. Our battle will be legendary. Fight me. Something in Izuku started to twist. Fine. Izuku growled, flexing his arm blades. Why was he agreeing to this? He didn't know, but he just had to fight. Now. Name the place. Ha. Okay. Come around the shop, there is an alley dash. Praying mantis was interrupted by Itsuka interposing herself between the two of them. Hold up, her fists grew, separating them as she shoved them between where they stood, not grabbing or touching either one of them but close enough to push if someone tried to move. You two just can't violate the quirk usage law just to fight. It'll be fine. So long as nobody sees us, Izuku huffed. The exoskeleton on his arm was itchy so he scratched at it. She snapped her head around at him and looked at him like he had grown a second head. He'd done that before and it had only left him with a massive headache. This is my fight. Praying mantis growled while he rolled up his sleeves. Once they were up to his elbows he flexed his arm and activated his quirk. 2 blades grew out from his own forearms. They were much longer and broader than Izuku's were, which confirmed he had a transformation quirk. But out of this and step aside dash, Toguru. What the hell? You dropped the Satu order all over the street. Are you crazy? A loud woman's voice shouted, and actually made Izuku's opponent, Toguru, retract his blades and shrink in on himself as he slowly turned to a new arrival. The woman that emerged was older than him but had the same mantis family resemblance, sans any mandibles of her own. Her green hair was styled as a braid and she looked sad. She wore an apron with a dozen pockets which were stuffed with all kinds of flowers and pruning tools. But Auntie Toguru tried to protest but was interrupted as his aunt brought her hand up. It changed in a flash, morphing into a scary-looking scissor claw that she clamped together sharply, a clear message for silence, or else there would be consequences. Don't you, but Auntie me. Your plane back to Nagasaki leaves tomorrow morning and we still have orders to fill. You promised your father and I that you would help us through the summer end rush before you went back to school. We still aren't done and you literally dropped a customer's order so you can go off and fight, the woman hissed. Fire seemed to leap from her eyes. Izuku could not help getting a vague sense of déjà vu. It was like watching Auntie Mitsuki scold Kacchan. Actually, it was an accident. Azui calmly said as she intervened, stepping up to the florist on a warpath. Oh, really? Toguru's auntie shifted her glare to the frog quirk user who much to her credit remained unflappable in the gaze of doom she was receiving. Yes. We were in a rush to meet a trainer for our quirks when these two, and she nodded her head to Izuku and Toguru, accidentally bumped into one another. He saw Toguru's eyes widen. Before he gave Izuku and his friends an appraising look, the gears turning in his head. His aunt continued to stare, seemingly unconvinced maybe. Was she waiting for something? It wouldn't be any trouble if we helped pick all of this up. Itsuka offered, I'll let our trainer know we will be a little late. That seemed to be the words the older woman was waiting for. I accept, she replied flatly, her scissor claw shifting back into a normal-looking hand, which she used to smack the back of her nephew's head. Well. What are you waiting for? Get to it. Despite himself, Izuku grumbled as she turned and walked away. There was not going to be a fight. He wanted to fight. He wanted to prove how sharp his blades were, he wanted a challenge and beat his opponent. Hold on. Izuku mentally shook his thoughts. Why was he acting so aggressive? He never showed his anger in public like this. That was something more like Kacchan would do. Are you okay? Kendu asked. The Amazon carefully placed a normal-sized hand on his shoulder, avoiding skin contact. He looked up into her eyes, they were so full of concern, for him. It just tore him up that he had worried her. What kind of friend was he? He nodded. Yeah. Just, he stumbled, my quirk just gets me. Oh no. Yeah, I know. Kendu puffed out her cheeks as she tried to think of something to make him feel better. At least you have a cool quirk to show Gran Torino, right? Right, he mumbled, glancing at the blades that had grown from his arms for a moment before he bent down and began to help pick up the scattered flowers. After a prd of silence while everything was gathered and rearranged, it was Toguru who broke it. You all are applying to you, too, aren't you? He gave them a stare, as if daring them to try and lie to him. We are. A friend knows a retired pro who is helping us with our quirks this week, Kendu acknowledged, handing him a bouquet. She hesitated over her next words as if weighing the pros and cons. Do you want to come too? He wasn't sure how Gran Torino would react to that. From what he had been able to piece together from what Itsuka had mentioned about him, he probably would not be happy at all. I can't. Toguru growled, gnashing his teeth. Kendu and Azui visibly relaxed when he turned to look at Izuku. I still got these deliveries for my aunt's shop. Then an early flight back home to Nagasaki. Izuku groaned in disappointment, which earned him more odd looks from his two friends. I guess that means we won't be able to fight until the entrance exam. You changed the content of each exam year by year. Sometimes it was giant robots, other times it was sparring between examinees, and other times the practical was like some TV talent game show. Though, Toguro would at least be in the city for a few days while he waited for his results. Damn it. Toguro cursed, dumping the last bouquets into a basket on a motorcycle that sat on the street in front of the shop. Wiping his hands on his pants, he turned and pointed to Izuku. The name is Toguro Kamakiri and you better be there at you, or I will hunt you down. You owe me a fight. Don't worry. I'll be there, and the name is Izuku Midoriya. He flexed his arm blades and grinned almost as feral as Toguro. That seemed to satisfy the mantis man, who nodded and hopped on his motorcycle, but before he could drive off a thought occurred to Izuku. Hold on. Could I have some of your hair? The words tasted like slime in his mouth. It was embarrassing to ask a complete stranger for their hair. Even after they had discovered his quirk could work with cells from a quirk holder's body, he had not asked. Just asking his two friends who knew about that ability of his quirk had been embarrassing, but asking a complete stranger. What? Toguro nearly toppled sideways off of his bike in surprise. The look on his face was concerned. Why? You aren't going to eat it or something? No, he shouted with a stressed groan. He hid his face behind his gloves. This was so awkward and embarrassing. Why couldn't the ground just swallow him whole right there? He needs it for his quirk. To practice. Karo. Azui came to his rescue again. Her tone sounded neutral, but he thought he heard a suppressed giggle. Kendu was less subtle about it before she cleared her throat. Yeah, that way he can practice with your quirk and get better for your fight. That does make sense. Toguro hummed, looking between them all. After a few seconds he shrugged his shoulders and brought a hand up. A small blade about the size of a knife grew out from the palm of his hand. He pulled on some of his hair and swiftly cut it off before he offered it to Izuku, who gingerly accepted the gift. Just be there at you, I will. Izuku murmured, nodding his head. Like hell he wasn't going to go to you. Whatever test they had he'd beat it down, and was this how Kacchan felt all the time? After Toguro departed on his motorcycle, Izuku quickly fetched a small baggie from his backpack and carefully deposited the hair sample into it before stuffing it back into his bag alongside two more which held Kendu and Azui's hair samples. It had been his mom's advice to carry bags around with him in case he found donations for his quirk. He wasn't a creep. He wasn't a creep. It was all his quirk's fault. They continued on their way without further incident, following the directions that Kendu had been given. He had trouble at first walking with his new appendages, but he was able to tuck them in closer to his body so he didn't accidentally cut or stab someone. His taller friend rambled on about the motorcycle that Toguro had ridden off on. She liked motorcycles and had plans to purchase one once she graduated and received her license. He also thought about Togoro's quirk, jotting down his thoughts in a notebook as he walked. He was good at multitasking. It was a transformation quirk which he believed allowed him to grow blades from his body. How many could he create at once? How hard did Toguro have to concentrate on his quirk to keep it effective? Could he control the sharpness of his blades? What happened if one was chipped or broken off his body? He'd have to test the sharpness when he had the chance. Would they regrow in Izuku's body if one came off? He had a lot to consider for his hero outfit if he was going to use this quirk. It was enough to distract him from his anger until they finally arrived at their destination. Are you sure this is the correct address? Azui asked, a finger on her chin. It matches what Mr. Yagi gave me. Kendu responded, frowning as she double-checked her phone. The apartment building that Gran Torino occupied as his home and agency looked like it had been condemned for the last 40 years, but no one had quite gotten around to knocking the building down. Windows were shattered, patches of brick had fallen off the sides, the paint had not been redone in decades at least. To complete the look of utter ruin, a tall fence with hazard stripes surrounded the building except for the front entrance where a "Welcome" sign hung limply above. All three hero hopefuls stared at the building, none of them moving to knock on the front door. It looks haunted, Izuku murmured. Or the scene of a grisly murder. Kendu sighed, her broad shoulders falling. After a few seconds she steeled herself, standing up straight and slapping her face lightly before she strode toward the door. Midoriyato, you want to bet that Gran Torino is still alive in there? Azui asked, giving him a side glance. UMI don't gamble, Izuku lied and mentally kicked himself to follow after Itsuka. She had already knocked on the door by the time he had begun to move, and much to their collective surprise the door swung open and Itsuka screamed. Oh my gods, he's dead, she shrieked and charged inside. Izuku gave Azui a look before they both followed quickly after her. Getting to the doorway he looked inside. The lights were off, but there was enough light from outside to see his friend picking up a small, wrinkled old man in a hero's costume consisting of a monochrome bodysuit and yellow cape and boots. Itsuka had a hand on the man's back. On the floor he saw a red BLD. He also saw chunks of meat where they his organs. I Itsuka d don't touch he body. We have to call the police. Izuku gasped, his body shaking as he stared at the corpse. Behind him, Azui sniffed the air and he could feel her tilt her head to the side. Ketchup. Oh oh. My apologies, the corpse spoke, lifting its head up from the ground and smiling shakily. He's alive. Izuku and Kendu shouted together, staring at the old man as he shakily got to his feet, using a cane he had been laying on to prop himself up. I was carrying something to eat when I tripped. Haha. Gran Torino huffed softly before he clapped his hands, the lights coming on and illuminating the inside of the building which looked just as run down as the outside. His beady eyes looked between the three friends. Oh. You must be Itsumi, Iruma, and Toru that young Toshi spoke of, eh? He didn't remember their names. Was this a prank by Mr. Yagi? He looked to Itsuka for clarification but she seemed as equally bewildered as he was. Why you are Gran Torino right? Itsuka asked softly and slowly, as if the sound of her voice would knock the old man over. Oh ho ho. Yes. That's me, youngster. He laughed softly before it became a series of hacking coughs which he had to thump his own chest to clear. Now then, why are you here? He didn't remember why they were there. Izuku's opinion of Mr. Yagi dropped by several levels. This was the teacher that had the man frightened. To train our quirks. Azui answered flatly, still giving the same unflappable face she had shown to the set-off florist not too long ago. Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Gran Torino said, tapping his chin in thought for several seconds before he brought up his cane and pointed it directly at Izuku. You have the copy quirk, yes. Good, you already have a quirk active. Why don't we test it? The old man's shift in demeanor sent a chill down everyone's spine. The dazed look was replaced with a smirk and a look that promised pain. Before Izuku could answer, Gran Torino burst up into the air, a contrail of air fuming from the soles of his boots, and landed on a wall. Then in a moment he was blasting off to another wall and another wall, getting faster each time until he stopped with a crash against one wall, hitting with enough force to make the concrete crack. What? But I can't dash, Izuku tried to protest but was interrupted by a loud scoff from the pro hero. What? Can't hit a fragile old man? Well, you are right about that, whippersnapper, but only because you'll miss every time you try to swing those clumsy-looking potato peelers of yours. Izuku wanted to try and disarm the situation, but that anger, that need to fight he had felt earlier with Toguro boiled up inside of him and pushed down his confused and nervous thoughts. Instead he glared back at the old man and balled his hands into fists. I'll show you. Just don't fall over and die on me before I beat you. Ah. The folly of youth, I'll never get tired of it. Gran Torino sneered, leaping off the wall and bouncing around again, moving faster with each leap. Midoriya dash. Itsuka began to say, but he ignored her as Gran Torino finally leapt back toward the ground and toward him. Take this. Izuku growled, swinging his forearm blades forward in front of him, only to have it pass through air. Gran Torino had only made it look like he was charging at him, instead he had slammed into the ground just out of reach of his blades, and then leapt back up into the air. Izuku knew that was bad because he had leaned forward too far into his attack. He couldn't move fast enough to turn around as he heard Gran Torino bounce off the ceiling almost directly above him and come down somewhere behind him. Too slow, the old man taunted, his fist smashing into Izuku's back between his shoulder blades and sending him rolling forward. Despite looking like he had one foot in the grave, the old man had a lot of power to his punch. Gah! Izuku hissed in pain, stumbling forward and just barely keeping himself on his feet. He whirled around slashing with his blades again, but Gran Torino was already gone, back into the air in a flash and coming back around to swipe at Izuku's side, sending him spinning and falling against the room's only couch. He tried to stand up but quickly found that one of his arm blades was embedded into the couch, tearing a hole through the upholstery. You're going to pay me back for that. Gran Torino stated as he leapt down on the other side of the couch and slapped both his gloved hands on top of Izuku's head, knocking him down into the couch hard enough to hit his chin and slip on his feet. Damn it. You old badash, Izuku bit down on his words as he struggled to get up. The blades on his legs kept getting in the way, hooking on the carpet, so it took him longer to pull himself back up. When he looked up Gran, Torino was still there. He looked unimpressed and had taken off one of his gloves. You might have someone else's quirk, but that doesn't mean you know how to fight with it. Try mine. Gran Torino said before pressing his open palm into Izuku's face. Wait! Izuku's plea was muffled by the old man's sweaty palm. He felt this quirk activate a moment later. Fly. Izuku felt a gap open in the soles of his feet, followed quickly by the rush of air. Have a nice flight, Iruma. Ya. Izuku shouted as he shot upward. The air pressure suddenly blasting from his feet was powerful enough to blow his shoes off, yank his arm painfully from the couch, and send him careening toward the ceiling. He hit it, hard, with his back, the force of his newly acquired quirk sputtering out a moment later and sending him falling from the high ceiling back down to the floor. Gran Torino simply stepped off the couch and backed up a few paces before Izuku crashed down onto the couch face first, the blades of his arms and legs now all sticking into the furniture. He tried to free himself but his blades wouldn't budge no matter how hard he tugged. Already he was losing stamina fast, so he did the only thing he could do. Sigh and fall forward in defeat. I give up. Izuku groaned into the couch cushion. Good, that's over with. Gran Torino sounded smug. Now, how about you, tadpole?